Over the past several months, we have seen that revolution is every bit as much about ideas as it is weapons and violence. The French and American revolutions and the ideals contained therein encouraged independence movements in other parts of the world. Today, we're going to talk about Simón Bolivar. He's known as the Liberator. Bolivar was a thinker and a fighter, a great example of Enlightenment ideas spreading democratic ideals throughout the world. Bolivar was born in 1783 in Caracas, Venezuela, and he lived until 1830. He came from a wealthy, aristocratic Creole family. The Creoles were descendants of Europeans who had permanently settled in Latin America. His family had become rich on gold and copper mines. He was raised by servants and slaves and sent to study in Spain and France. While studying, he became entranced by Enlightenment ideas. He was particularly fond of Voltaire, Montesquieu, Adam Smith, and Rousseau. He was so enamored with these writers that actually throughout his life he carried their works around with him. While in he was harassed for being a Creole. He had nice stuff, he was rich, but because of his background, people didn't like him. And so they took his things away from him and put him in jail. He never forgave Spain for this. While in France, he actually attended Napoleon's coronation. He was impressed by Napoleon's dynamism and his charisma. He was appalled, however, by his betrayal of the French Revolution accomplishments. Bolivar said, based on the things that he saw in Europe, "I will not rest until I have broken the chains that bind us to the will of Spain." Returning home, he dedicated himself to the idea of overthrowing Spanish rule. He subscribed especially to Rousseau's notion that the intellectual and educated elite should identify what is in the best interest of the people and pursue it. He thought that the subjugation to Spanish colonial rule had left people ignorant and dependent, thus unable to become their full selves. It was therefore in the name of the greater good to free these people so that they could become the best possible version of themselves. In other words, for him, revolution was for the greater good, very much an Enlightenment idea. He takes advantage of the chaos caused by the Peninsular War. Napoleon's invasion of Spain had weakened its control over the Latin American colonies. It resulted in nationalist uprisings, and Bolivar is an example of someone who takes advantage of this and is able to overthrow the weakened Spanish rule. It's another example of the ripples of history, and especially that we've seen this semester. The Enlightenment, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the age of Napoleon, all coming together directly and indirectly to create the experience of Simón Bolivar. His process starts in 1808. He gains freedom for Venezuela in 1821. This is a really slow process with numerous defeats. He was exiled twice, much like his sort of hero, Napoleon. In battle, he was bold and aggressive, almost suicidal. He was tenacious. He would never give up. He was always on offense. He would never retreat. He was known for using unexpected moves. He didn't really have formal military training to speak of, and so it was easy for him to stymie his enemies. The battles that he took place in were extremely brutal. There was a lot of pillaging and raping that took place. Awful battles. There's one interesting story that comes out of these battles, however. During one battle in the Andes Mountains, his men were momentarily taken aback by a large barking dog. This isn't the actual dog, but this is the kind of dog that it was. This dog's name was Nevado, which means snow or snowing. Bolivar's men wanted to kill the dog, but Bolivar said no, he saved it. The village people were so happy with this that they gave Bolivar the dog, and he continued to have it by his side throughout many of his battles. There are many statues of the dog throughout Latin America. He's kind of become a hero in his own right. Novato died at the Battle of Carabobo in 1821. Ultimately, Bolivar creates a Latin American union of independent states that he calls Gran Colombia. You see it here on the map. He is president of this union from 1819 to 1830. He thought that this would be a strong counterbalance to Europe and the United States. He really felt that the idea of a balanced power would be best for the world. He bases some of his ideas in creating the government on the American experience. He likes some of what the United States does, but not completely. For example, he hates slavery. Remember that he was actually raised by a slave. He feels that Latin America cannot really take a democracy. He feels that the people simply weren't ready for it, and that if they tried, it would lead to a dictatorship. Therefore, he's for a strong central government. So again, a way in which he differs from the United States system, he advocates a lifetime president who would choose their heir and a hereditary Congress. So not at all what the United States experience had seen. We'll see several quotes from Bolivar, but one thing that he said on this topic was, "We shall avoid elections. They always result in that great scourge of republics, anarchy." So his idea of a free and democratic election just completely counter to what we see in the United States. Mostly he felt that the turbulent political environment of Latin America would need an incredibly firm hand. What he tries to do then with his system is balance control, stability, unity, and freedom. And as you've seen many times already, that is a difficult balancing process to achieve. There are a lot of inherent contradictions in Simón Bolívar. He is a liberator, as his nickname suggests, but at the same time, he ultimately becomes a dictator. And those two things don't really go very well together. We see it commonly, but it is not a successful combination. What Bolivar discovers is that political independence was relatively easy to achieve, but political stability for him was almost impossible to maintain. He had many internal factions fighting against him. These different entities that he had brought together wanted to become independent states, and they were constantly pushing in that direction. As he tries to hold it all together, he realizes that he has another problem as well. The geography of Latin America was not particularly conducive to democracy. It is characterized by impassable mountain ranges, large swaths of rainforest. All of these things came together to make it very, very difficult for the political stability that he hoped for to achieve. Another quote by Bolivar, he says, "Those who serve the revolution plow the sea." Now, before we talk about that more, just imagine that image. Imagine that you are trying to take the farm implement, a plow, and you're trying to plow the sea. You're trying to move it in such a way that it remains in that state. And to think about doing that, it just seems insane that the water would just come rushing back in as you moved forward. It would be a very, very difficult task, an impossible task. Some would even say an insane task. This phrase, plow the sea, is also related to something that you've studied before. That's the legend of Odysseus, who did not want to go to war, and so he pretended to be insane by plowing the sea shore. And again, that image of trying to move your way through the sand and the surf, of course it wouldn't be successful. So Bolivar is saying this: if you participate in this idea of revolution, understand that ultimately you will probably be discouraged. You will be disappointed because the forces that you're trying to move are almost impossible to move. At the time of his death, he realized that his vision for a unified region had failed to materialize in any kind of a sustainable way. But that does not mean that he's not important to our study of history. He most certainly is for the things that he attempted to do. He is considered both the George Washington and the Abraham Lincoln of Latin America. His legend is pretty important in the world. There are statues not just of he and his dog, but statues of him throughout Latin America. There are currencies named for him. He appears on many stamps. If you think about this statistic, there are 195 countries in the world. 23 of those are named for people, and 2 of the 23 are named for Simón Bolivar. With that in mind, let's take a look at a couple of questions. Back to this idea that he liked from Rousseau. Should the intellectual and educated elite decide what is best for all citizens? And is it true that not all people are able to handle a democracy? In other words, does democracy only work sometimes? So let's take a look at those questions as we consider the legend and the legacy of Simón Bolivar.